Welcome back to Mind What Matters, where we talk about all things caregiving and minding what matters. Oh boy, she's breathing heavily already. Today we are talking with Vanessa Bentley. And I'm pretty sure my co-host here lost her mind just a little.
I love
Can you even talk about it?
woman. I can't even talk about it. I don't even know how to wrap my brain around this conversation because she is a unicorn. I went to school for psychology. I've taken more classes than I can count in the field. I wanted to get my master's. I still might get my master's. I've been in therapy since I was 21. The amount of information that I read on mental health, that I listen to, that I absorb on a daily basis. And this woman came into this building and absolutely blew my mind because what she does, there's so many different ways of entering into mental health.
Oh,
if
for
you're
sure.
on the road of, and I say recovery, she uses healing. I like recovery because I don't know that we're ever fully healed of something. I just think that we recover. Right. And the way that we recover is really important. And I have gone through talk therapy where you go sit in the room and you talk through things and they just listen and you come out and you're like, oh, that feels good to get that off my chest.
But it didn't really help me.
But it didn't really help me.
Yep.
Exactly. If you're new to it, and cognitive behavioral therapy is like a tiptoe into it, and that feels just safe enough for you right now.
That's a great way of looking at it.
Just start there. But
It's like just enough.
Just enough. But what I will tell you, the place that she's wanting you to go to, because there's all sorts of things. There's internal family systems. There's cognitive behavioral therapy. I went through very intense trauma therapy last year doing EMDR. There's so many different types of therapy, and I've done all of them.
Her approach is unique. There's therapy, and then there's
Vanessa's approach. And what she is doing is she is saying there are 3 stages of this. First, it's self-discovery.
Truth. It's truth.
It's self-discovery. And second is self-compassion, because if you can't be compassionate with yourself, you're never going to tell the truth. So getting to that self-compassion, and then the third stage being self-love. And what is the source of everything that we struggle with on a daily basis, whether it's with ourselves or in relationship or all the things, is we're really just trying to get to the self-love. That's it.
Loving that part of yourself
that you often hate.
The worst. It's the worst side of yourself. It's the qualities about yourself that you hate. It's the words that you find coming out of your mouth when you're at your worst and then regretting it later, right? Like that's all self-loathing. Every bad story you tell yourself, you're with a group of friends and you're constantly in your head going, did I just say the right thing? Did I do the right thing? Who wants to live like that?
I don't.
It's not a good way to go.
I don't. I want to be happy. I want to be present. Or I don't want happy. I want joy. Happy can be fleeting, but joy.
That's right.
I want presence.
I want humility.
I want humility. I want the ability to be able to be in deep relationships with people, connected relationships with people. I want to be embodied. I want to be able to stay in my body and not disassociate. You know, all of these things. And truly, she also comes to it with her faith. Yep. And you don't have to have faith to do her work. You don't. You don't have to be, she's a Christian. I'm a Christian. Liz is a Christian. You don't have to have that to do this work. But I do love that she is honest enough to bring that to her work, because so many therapists don't.
That's right.
But that's just what she does. And anyway,
don't spoil anymore. Let them listen.
I'm not going to talk anymore because I could talk about her all day long.
There's no way we're going to do this conversation justice and even talking about it. But what I'll say is I feel like, none of you are going to find healing or recovery or whatever you want to call it with this 1-hour episode. But what I will tell you is it will put you on the path to discovering it for yourself, I think. So please enjoy this conversation with Vanessa Bentley. Welcome back to Mind What Matters, where we talk about all things caregiving and minding what matters. Today we are talking with Vanessa Bentley. She is a licensed professional counselor serving the Nashville and broader Middle Tennessee communities. Before becoming a psychotherapist, she earned a BFA in musical theater from the Tisch School of Arts at New York University and worked in theater, film, television, and print modeling for 10 years. From the professional stages of Manhattan to the historical stages of Europe, including a European tour of West Side Story in the role of Maria, her work as an actress brought her to both coasts of America and across oceans. After 10 years, she transitioned careers, earning an MA in counseling from Trevecca Nazarene University in Nashville, Tennessee. She cut her teeth in the field of a community nonprofit, servicing underprivileged clients throughout Middle Tennessee. Vanessa's career expanded as she began to lecture and teach counseling students, divinity students, and clergy on the intersection of psychology and theology. Vanessa has lectured at Vanderbilt University, Lipscomb University, Nashotah House Seminary, Sewanee, the University of the South, Cumberland Heights Addiction Treatment Center, and more. In 2021, she expanded her reach by publishing her first book, The Toolbox, the tools we need to build relationships and repair them when they break, and launching her podcast, Substance, Not Psychobabble. Vanessa's voice is currently heard in 78 nations around the world, and her message is simple. Your soul work is to discover who you truly are and learn how to love that human being.
Welcome to the podcast, Vanessa.
Thank you.
And I didn't even know part of that, and you're my therapist.
I am
Secrets out.
Yeah, secrets out.
Secrets out,
This
guys.
is Liz's therapist.
You're about to get all the tea.
I'm so excited.
That didn't take long.
I can't even tell you how excited I am for many reasons. Number one, my favorite thing to talk about is mental health and everything that goes into that. I love that. As I listened to you and got to know you via Liz, I love, because this is kind of how I move through it as well, that, and this doesn't have to be true for all people. If you have a faith, if you don't have a faith, but for me, my faith is so interwoven into my mental health and my spiritual health. And I love that that's a part of what you talk about, a part of what you do. And as I was also listening to you, I was like, oh, there's also aspects of ACA, which I find to be so helpful.
Tell people what that is.
To adult children of alcoholics. But you didn't have to have a parent who was an alcoholic to be able to be in the program. You know, maybe you went through abuse as a child. There was emotional abuse, physical abuse. Maybe there was a narcissistic parent. Maybe there could be multitude of reasons why you find yourself in an ACA program. But talk about having a toolbox that is so helpful.
For sure.
The tools that they give you in that program. And on top of it, the icing on, or I would say the foundation of all of it, is that you come from a place of not being in denial, acknowledging, and wrapping. You're really just trying to get to the self-love. They are all my favorite ways of practicing. And I couldn't believe, I was like, this is actually a person who does all the things.
The trilogy of mental health.
The trilogy of mental health. You are the trilogy of mental health. Wow. We found the unicorn. And can we start at the beginning, maybe?
Sure.
With your backstory,
Tell
childhood.
us about you.
Tell us about you and your story, and then also your why.
Yeah. So I grew up in New Jersey, and I was the youngest of 4 children, 4 daughters. And my mother emigrated here from Colombia, South America, and she met my dad. That story is kind of interesting. But my father is a second-generation American. His father came from Italy. So I was raised sort of in this it was a cultural clash, for lack of a better phrase. I was sort of too Hispanic for my American friends, but way too American for my Hispanic family. So my sisters and I grew up somewhat speaking Spanish, but my mom spoke a lot of English. So anyway, it was a very interesting way to grow up. There was a lot of love. There was a lot of passion. It's Colombian and Italian. So, do the math. There was hot blood. There was a lot of family laughter and rolling on the floor until, your sides are splitting. And then there was a lot of passionate fighting that went on. My family had a lot of love, but they lacked the emotional tools to develop intimacy, to really get to know us as their own children. I think they knew us as they wanted us to be. And I think they took our gifts and our talents, and that was what they knew about us. But as far as like the deeper knowing, which really has to do with listening, that didn't happen in my family.
I think you're speaking to most families when you
Yeah.
speak about that right now. I think that's what a lot of us deal with. Continue, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's common. I mean, there's, and I guess we'll get into this at some point, but there's trauma and then there's dysfunction. And if we're talking about dysfunction, basically we're talking about the extent to which a family meets the needs of its members. So the more functional the family, the more the needs are met within the family system. The way you guys just looked at each other is so funny. And then the more...
because we both come from families of monster dysfunction.
Well, and again, I think, to repeat what you just said, I think we all do, and I think we look at our families, and there's a journey here of when you're growing up in it, you're indoctrinated in it. And so you develop those coping mechanisms. And the apples don't fall that far from the tree. Was there narcissism, if we're going to touch on that, in my family? Sure, there was. One of the hardest places of growth, and I'll get to that, in my adult life was to face the narcissistic coping mechanisms that I had developed in my own life. And I think if we have narcissistic parents and we think that we're escaping that, we're in delusion.
Totally.
The apples don't fall that far from the tree. And once we claim it and we say, hey, I have this too, I'm seeing this, excuse me, in myself too, that's when we can grow. That's when we can change. So
Amen.
Really the trajectory of my life was moving from this facade that I thought I was supposed to be, when you're the child of parents who have some of those defense mechanisms and those coping mechanisms that we call narcissism, there's a lot of pressure placed on children to be extraordinary, right? So, because we're the mirror back to them. So I wasn't allowed to know who I was. I was only allowed to be the mirror that would reflect sort of their, I think their image that they wanted to keep of themselves back to them.
That's right.
So I didn't really have a sense of self for a long time, but then you put me in the arts, and this is sort of interesting, and this is its own podcast.
You two are like, y'all take it away.
That's right.
I'll be
You're about
down
to
the
be my
street.
best friend.
All right, we're in it. I'm here with you. So when you're in the arts, I think so much of what you find in yourself is in the art itself. And so you're not allowed to know yourself and really feel who you are, but you can find yourself in characters and you can find yourself in music, right? So the arts for me were like a homing device. Like I could sort of find my way back to myself by the stories that resonated with me.
Right? Yes, I always say, because I started at 7, left home at 12, never lived back.
Okay. Woof.
I am so comfortable in a character.
Yeah.
The cameras can see me.
Yeah.
I am vulnerable. I can cry. I can shout. And it started off as a dancer. I was a dancer for 20 years. And that's how I moved trauma out of my body. It's how I told like a story in a way. But if you put me on a red carpet and it's just me and there's no character, I totally disassociate. To this day. Mm-hmm. I there was a red carpet that I recently just didn't go on. I was doing a back-to-back party situation, and I did the first one. I was like, okay, I got through that, and went to the next party and went, you know what? I'm going to skip it. I can't. Because the anxiety, so I'm still working through that.
Yes.
Like what you're just saying of like, but give me a character. Oh, and I'll let you see everything.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is, I've known you for all of 15 minutes now, and there's a real gift in you of warmth and genuineness.
Thanks.
And directness, but it's really...
I am honest.
Well, it's a powerful combination to be both direct and warm.
Oh, thanks.
Right? Because sometimes directness can come across as bluntness, but to be direct and warm is sort of like an energy hug. And so you exude that. And so it's nice that you're still working on that, because when you're face to face with someone and it's you and you're not in a character, and I'm not trying to give you therapy, but I want to just say that would be the gift you'd be giving somebody. It's just the presence of who you are in real time.
What did I say to you this morning in the car?
Do you want to give me your Kleenex?
Oh, well, shoot, I just had a ton.
That's
what did I
beautiful.
say to
Thank
you in the car?
Yeah.
I don't know. You said a lot of things, and I had not had a lot of coffee.
One of the best compliments I think I've ever paid you. So superb. I told you that I was already sad about you leaving.
Oh, yes.
Because I literally, I know we're like separated at birth, but I have a peace when I'm around you that is so hard to find in this world. There's a million friends out there and there's a million acquaintances, but like what you and I have is really special. And I truly I just feel at peace when I'm with you.
Same.
I feel at peace when I'm with your boys and Ryan even and Crazy Windsor. And I know you feel that around mine too. And it's such a gift.
Safety.
Safety.
Yeah. So, I'll wrap up this part because I don't know if this is the most interesting part. But so I went to the Tisch school and I, did that thing. I lived that life. And
it's a big life.
It was fun. And it was also really anxiety inducing because I was craving authenticity, but I was living in characters. So I didn't know who I was. And to be honest, and I don't know if you're listening out there and you can relate to this, I don't think I was a very likable person. The defense mechanisms that I developed, both of your faces were like, huh.
I was like, I find you very endearing and likable.
I know.
I've done so much work.
Exactly. I understand. Continue.
Well, what I mean is, I was very competitive. I was extremely insecure. I was addicted to attention from men. I want to keep this podcast clean, but
you don't have to.
You don't have to. You should have heard what was happening on here yesterday.
I look back. So let's fast forward. My journey of mental health came to a place where I realized I think you just have to learn how to love yourself. And this was years ago. And I remember going to my therapist about it. I was already a practicing clinician. And I said, don't you think self-love is the answer to all of this? And he sort of had this knowing smile on his face. My nickname for him is Yoda. He's much older. But back then, looking backwards, I would say, man, if I met me at that time, I would have thought, what a bitch. I mean, I was just very, I was probably still warm, but I wasn't real. I didn't know how to be. And so I was sort of shape-shifting all the time into these different characters, depending on who I was around. But really what was at the core of me, and I think this is what made me, I think, at least to myself, an unpleasant person then, was I was really angry. I was so angry. The way that my brain, for whatever reason, processed our home life was it constantly felt unfair. Probably because I was the youngest kid and we're Colombian and there were 4 daughters and it's a matriarchy. So I was just at the bottom of the totem pole all the time just by virtue of the fact that I was born last. So there were many, many things that happened in my family system that all of my sisters got to experience that I didn't. And then they all got gifts that I didn't get. And it wasn't like my parents were favoring them. In fact, I think my mother favored me because I was her baby. And that created a lot of,
other
tension.
stuff.
Just this is all the dysfunction. Like we're just talking about, we're shooting arrows at all this different kinds of dysfunction. But the big story is there was no way to repair it. And
repair is everything.
it is in a family system.
Yes.
And it is with yourself, but it is in a family system if we're talking about families because no one is perfect. There is no perfect parent. A dysfunctional family can become highly functional as soon as the members of the family, particularly the parents, start taking responsibility for what they're doing and having reparative conversations with their children. As soon as that happens, the family's healing.
Yes.
As soon as that happens, you're on a healing path. As soon as a parent can look at themselves and say, okay, if I'm empathically connected to you, if I'm less worried about how you see me as a parent,
yes,
and I'm more concerned with the quality of our connection and the authenticity and the genuineness of that connection, the family's already healing. So looking back, I look at my mom. My mother was raised in a third world country. She had an 8th grade education. She was raised in a convent by nuns. Yeah, she was the youngest daughter of 14 children. She was number 13.
Dear
her father
Lord.
was blind. Just what she went through in her life. And, she's long past. She died almost 20 years ago. But where she is now, I don't think she'd care if I told her stories. She was very sexually abused as a child, not by her parents, but by other people in her life. So she was just dealing with all of her own trauma and had all these coping mechanisms. One of them was a narcissistic tendency of self. I mean, my mother sort of lived in a fantasy land where no one is ugly and no one hurts her and no one betrays you that way. And no one leaves children to be that vulnerable. Like she concocted this whole fantasy world and then pulled us into it. But the narcissistic personality is the one that will exploit someone to preserve their fantasy rather than their empathy leading them into reality.
That's the best, clearest way I've ever
Does that make
heard.
sense?
Say it slower.
Say it one more time.
So the root of it, and I think this is so important because we're so hard on these people. And the reality is there is a wound there.
Yes.
That is so deep and so profound that it has to be protected at any cost. And the protection that somebody with this personality style creates is a fantasy world that basically protects them from feeling the wound.
That's right.
So that fantasy is what you'll read in the DSM, grandiose thoughts, fantasy, thinking about having high status or beauty or perfect love or power. And it gets all of this nasty language around it. But the truth is you've got a person here who's deeply wounded, and they create this fantasy around the wound so that they don't have to feel it. And if anybody pushes into that fantasy, they're going to either exploit you to become a pawn in the fantasy,
Yes.
or they will reject you fully.
Yes.
Right? Those are the only two options. Now, if you're in a relationship with one of these people, it's extremely confusing.
It's confusing. It's painful.
Yes.
You will end up feeling that there is something wrong with
Yes.
you and broken about you.
Yes.
You will internalize
Yes.
everything. You're the problem.
Yep.
And it can be extremely emotionally damaging.
It is, because the sense of self is what's attacked.
Yes.
When I was 23 years old, and, of course, we could all tell our life stories for 20 years. We've lived them. I'm 46. It takes 46 years to tell my life story. But, when I was 23 years old, I made a phone call to a therapist. It was the first time I ever saw a therapist. And I grew up in a very Christian household, and, I am a Christian, but I was raised in such a place where my mother was like, Jesus is my therapist. I'm like, here we go, And I'm like, but you're so problematic. I think he's failing. Someone's failing here. Is it you? Is it him? What's the problem?
Yeah.
So at 23, I called a therapist, and I remember her voicemail. I remember getting that voicemail. I can remember it like it was yesterday. And I said, hi, my name's Vanessa. I need someone to call me back today. I'm afraid I'm going to hurt myself. And I wasn't kidding.
Yeah.
I mean, I was so suicidal
I've
at that
been there.
time.
Yeah.
I was so low. My self-esteem was so brutalized through many things at that point in my life. So she called me back that day, and she said, Vanessa, I think you need to come in this afternoon. So thank you, God, for therapists who have quick openings. So I went to see her, and then I plopped myself down in that chair, and her office was on 34th between 5th and 6th. So if you know New York City, you know that the view out of her window was the Empire State Building.
Yeah.
So I would sit there and just stare at the Empire State Building and then look at her, and it was the first time in my life I ever felt compassion. It was the first time in my life anybody ever empathized with me, ever. I mean, I'm sure teachers did, like parents of friends, but an authority figure that I was directly in relationship with, this is the first time I ever felt compassion, and I cried for like 6 months. Just kept, all my friends are going out, they're buying shoes, they're buying clothes. I'm like, I can't afford any of that. I'm paying for therapy.
Vanessa, I
was
had
like a
the
starving
same
artist.
I had the same experience. The first time I went in to actually sit with a therapist who showed me compassion, I cried that entire hour. I couldn't get a word out. I went through her entire box of Kleenex.
Yeah.
And then after the hour was up, she goes, well, I think that was a great start.
Yes.
And I could not stop crying because it was the first time that I had felt the touch of not just compassion, but somebody who wanted not just to see me, but understand me.
Yes, and I think, there was a lot going on there therapeutically. Of course, I didn't have the pleasure of being in the room with you, but when we cry in session, and there's such a reluctance to cry in session because it's, it's vulnerable, right? And we're showing the weakest side of ourselves, the side of ourselves that's not composed.
Yeah.
The side of ourselves that is wild, untamed,
Yeah, I love
unedited,
it.
right? And so that's what's happening when we're crying, and the harder we cry, the more control we're losing.
Totally.
And so it's very hard to do that with a witness. But what's actually happening therapeutically in the room, and this is what's so important, is that when you're crying and you are mentally recalling, whether it's trauma or hardship or just pain in relationship, and then your body starts to cry, in that moment, maybe for the first time for a lot of people, your mind and your body are connected.
Yeah.
Right. So that dissociation starts to heal in real time in the therapy office.
Gosh, you're right.
You are
So
right.
that's why it's so important to cry in therapy. And that's why therapists say, let it out, let it come, don't stop it, don't block it. Because what's happening right now is the body, all those neural pathways are rewiring in the moment, and the body is coming back into sync with the heart, with the mind. I mean, I could cry talking about it, but that's actually what's happening when you cry.
That is it.
Right? So you need a witness. You need someone who's going to say, no, don't fragment again.
Yeah.
Because what is the result of trauma? fragmentation.
Yes.
Right? We compartmentalize ourselves as beings. My head is over here, my heart is over here, my body does this. And as long as those things can stay separate, we can retain a false sense of control about ourselves. Right? But when, just crying, when we cry, all of those fragmented, compartmentalized parts, just for 5 minutes in a therapist's office, come back together again. And you've got a loving witness to that. I had coffee with a friend of mine.
And they keep coming back.
Yes.
That's the craziest part.
The tears?
No, well, sometimes.
Yeah, the client.
The pieces.
The pieces, yes.
It's almost like that act of crying and what you said, the fragmentation, like you've stopped disassociating.
Yes.
You are finding out what really happened in a moment.
Yeah.
And what belief you either formed or what lie you told yourself to get through that moment.
Yeah.
It's like all of a sudden you've inserted a key into the lock and you've turned the lock. But then for the next 3, 4, 5 weeks, the door continues to open.
That's right.
And more information starts flooding in. And I think that, as powerful as what happens in the room with a therapist, in this case you, it's what follows up.
Yeah.
It's the days and weeks after that you're like, oh my gosh.
Yes. Well, you need someone who's willing. Therapy is not a magic bullet.
No.
And I get so tired, like, oh, someone needs a therapist. I'm like, well, first of all, they need a good therapist.
Yes.
Okay? They need to be willing.
Yes.
And the therapist and the client have to line up in terms of a lot of things, but probably the most important thing, at least at the outset, is you need a skill set as a therapist who can work with the issues of the client. And the problem that I see in the mental health world today, and I won't go too far down this rabbit hole because it's really deep and then I get mad.
That's okay. That's what we've been doing this whole season. Getting mad about the way
angry,
women have been told lies and told to believe them.
And I would say men are in the same boat here when it comes to mental health, is we've so overly pathologized humanity, just humanity, that you can't heal anymore. Every single thing you're experiencing as a human being has a diagnosis attached to it. And they're not even, don't even get me started. These are not real diseases. I mean, this is not like people sitting in, laboratories with microscopes like, oh, we've identified the cells or the pathology of depression.
These are not cancer cells, yes.
No, these are decided on by committee every 10 years or so. And then they're put in the DSM, which started out, I think, like 98 pages, and there were like 101 disorders or whatever. And now it's like, it is a tome. It's 600
I've seen
pages.
the book. It's crazy.
And there's 300 diagnoses, but you can't see any of them under a microscope. But we're handing these out, and people are trading them over lunch. Like, oh my gosh, I'm so OCD. Well, it's my anxiety. It's like, how are we supposed to heal anymore? We've lost our humanity. I had coffee.
Totally agree that we have lost our humanity.
But our respect for it.
In so many different ways, that is really what it comes down to.
100%.
Yeah.
And I'll throw this out there because we're talking about crying, and I think people need to hear this and understand this. Maybe this will help some of you. I had coffee with a colleague a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about office space, whatever else. And we were talking about the field, and he's really moved more into sort of an entrepreneurial side of the field, but he's still, he retired from clinical practice. And as I was talking to him about, stuff that's coming up in my caseload and like the interesting stuff that I'm dealing with, blah, 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 he said, man, you're making me jealous. You're making me want to go back into clinical practice again. And I'm like, you're missing all the fun,
Yeah.
And I said, but we were talking about like vicarious traumatization, because that is real. Therapists do get traumatized by our clients, and we have to deal with that on our side. And that's fine. That's part of the field. But I was talking about how easily, and maybe you know this, I cry in session with clients. And it's not, I'm not, Mother Teresa. I'm really not. I've got a story and a half. I gave you the nice version. But part of that is empathy, right? That's
my
I'd say the
therapist
bulk
cries
of
with
it.
me, and he's a man.
Well, and good for him. But as I was describing this, I teared up because I was talking about what was coming to my mind. I was talking about dealing with trauma, but what was coming to my mind was a client that I've worked with whose story is probably the worst story of trauma I've ever heard in my life, ever. And I just got tears in my eyes, and he looked at me, and he comes from the Greek Orthodox tradition, and he said, oh, you have the gift of tears. And I said, what? Because my world, I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, the gift of tears. It's one of the spiritual gifts. And I was like, what? Tell me about this, because I've had this gift my whole life.
Right. Me too.
And so I would encourage you to Google it. Go do your homework if you're listening to this podcast. Google, look it up, the gift of tears. It is actually a spiritual gift in which your emotions and like the raw beauty of your humanity is so accessible to you that the tears you shed, not just for yourself, but for other people, are considered a gift.
I've always just called it being an empath, but that's way better. And sometimes it's very overwhelming.
Well, it is overwhelming. And I think often, and thank you for talking so I could take a sip. My throat's so dry. It's been dry for a week. It is being an empath. And I think it goes deeper than that. And that's kind of what I was saying. Like, part of it's empathy. I think the bulk of it is empathy. At least that's what we call it, like the ability to feel what other people are feeling in real time. But there is, I think, in some people, a connection to what ought to be.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when we're in the presence of what is not and what should not be, we grieve.
Yeah. God, that's
my
a beautiful
therapist
statement.
Yeah, my therapist always has me see, where is it located in your body?
Yeah.
Right? And if it's here, that sucker is grief.
Yeah. So that's where you feel grief, here in your chest.
Yeah, and that is grief.
Didn't you say
And
it felt like a fire?
so, whether it's actual, the way we think of grief in terms of my dad, right? Losing my dad, that felt like it was burning.
Yeah.
Like it was on fire for like a year, just burning.
Yeah.
But then there's other ways we grieve. We grieve the love we didn't get as children. Yeah. We grieve, for those of us who have been sexually abused, we grieve something that was taken from us that we can never get back.
Yeah.
And I find that like so often we try to just bypass those griefs because it's not death. Mm-hmm. It's not a death of a loved one, right? At least I did. For years, I was running and running and running and running. But the second my body and my mind and my spirit did that thing that you said, and it just went, right? It locked. That, and I was totally embodied. Then I went, whoa. Okay, this is where the work begins. But I think that like those tears that we shed, it is the way that we move through that stuff and allow ourselves to feel it.
Yeah. And I think the way that it's pathologized, and this isn't official pathology, meaning there's no diagnosis attached to that, but I think people who have that sort of ability to be in touch with sort of the soul of the world, you know what I mean? We're called dramatic.
Oh yeah, I was called dramatic my whole childhood.
Right. And now, look, I will speak for myself. I was dramatic again.
I can be very dramatic.
I can imitate my mom, which is really, anyway, my mother was the most dramatic woman in the world. She learned English from watching soap operas.
Oh my
So
gosh,
the way that
amazing.
she spoke English is she would be like, "Ay, Vanesita, it was raining so hard on the way home. It was like the tears of God were falling on the car." Like, it was like, okay, Mom, it's a lot. It's a lot.
What?
That
Also,
is better in person
I want
than it was on the microphone. I promise.
I want to write that character. I want to put that character to script.
Well,
oh my
her
gosh.
name was Inés Arias del Junco. I mean, she was just the most, Betsa Inés Arias del Junco. She was something else. So yes, I was dramatic. I picked all of that up from her. And I think if we talked about that as sort of a mental health perspective, a lot of us in emotionally invalidating environments, we feel like we have to up the ante.
That's right.
Right? So we say it louder. We say it stronger. We give it a little bit of oomph. We give it some exaggeration, and then it's a slippery slope into becoming deceptive, But I think in environments where we're really heard, and heard in such a way that you feel like someone's hanging on your every word, like really heard and paid attention to, it's amazing how non-quote-unquote dramatic we become. We become simpler. We become more honest. It's much easier to sort of tap in and speak the truth, connected to the breath, connected to the gut. But I think so many of us talk big, and use up a lot of space and energy and time with our words. And again, we're called dramatic, but I guess I would want to ask, have you ever felt heard?
I love that you are asking this, because this was one of the things that I went through in discovering of, I was never heard as a child, growing up in the South. I was told every day, it's better to be seen and not heard. Do not speak, look pretty, be thin, be perfect, and because that's what my mother was told by her mother, and that's what her mother told her, and it's the cycles, right? Yeah. So then I enter into the entertainment business, but even if it wasn't that, I was fighting to be heard.
Yeah.
And then I enter into my marriage, right?
Yeah.
I have my first child. I have suicidal postpartum anxiety. I am fighting to be heard with my husband. And I was constantly called dramatic by him. You're just being dramatic. Yeah. And it was some of our biggest fights. Yeah. To this day, I will say to him, I don't want to have to go into the place where I have to be hyperbolic to get you to listen to me. Yeah. And it's part of his trauma too, because his mother yelled and screamed and did all, and his house was chaos and it was all of this stuff. So the only way she got heard is if she threw something or screamed something or did that. So that was the pattern in their house. Yeah. So my husband wouldn't wake up to anything until I was losing my mind. Yeah. And it doesn't feel good. And so finally I got to the place in our therapy together to say, don't make me do that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. When I tell you that I feel this or that this is happening, believe me. Yeah. So that I don't have to go to that dramatic place.
Yeah. Meg Ryan called that place the mattresses.
Right.
Yes. Mattresses.
Remember, and You've Got Mail.
And You've Got Mail.
Like, go to the mattresses.
Which is a reference to The Godfather.
Yeah. Right? Don't make us do that. Yeah. Listen to us and let us be heard, because I love that you said that. That really is what it is.
Well, let's talk about that from a relational perspective, because relationships are super fun, right?
They are. I love it.
So we have options when we're not being heard in relationship, and there's a lot going on in a relationship where listening is not a focus, okay? So when I wrote the toolbox and I sat down with myself and I wrote down from, at that point, 10 years of clinical practice working with couples, I'm like, what tools do they really need to, to be able to communicate with each other and not just connect, but maintain connection? And that was sort of the issue. So I'll back up a little bit. I go to this Gottman training, and John and Julie Gottman are fabulous marital researchers, if you know the Gottmans. Yeah. And you can go to clinical training and learn the Gottman method. So I've done the clinical training, and I'm level 1, level 2 certified. Blah, blah, blah. And so we're sitting in this room, and there's 60 therapists in the room, and this guy stands up at the front of the room, and he's got a pedigree, a mile long. He's like the chairman of the trauma chapter of the world, and he's got a PhD and a master's. Just all of these degrees and titles and credentials. I was like, my goodness, this guy. And he goes, okay, why do people get divorced? Why do relationships fail? Why do marriages fail? And this person over here says infidelity. He's like, sure, could maybe, not always. Disagreements, conflict, blah, blah, blah. And I'm sitting in the back of the room, and I just risked it. I always sit in the back row. I raised my hand. Yeah, you in the back. And I said, disconnection. And he was like, thank you. Okay. What we're talking about in a relationship is what draws us into relationship is falling in love. And when you fall in love with somebody, I'm just stealing this from M. Scott Peck. If you want to read The Road Less Traveled, go ahead and read it. But it's a collapse of the ego boundaries, right? Every boundary you have in your brain about who you are and what you want goes out the window. That's exactly right. And so as the relationship progresses, and it takes about 2 to 3 years, and we call this the honeymoon period, it is the collapse of ego boundaries. It takes about 2 to 3 years for your ego boundaries to sort of spring back into place. And then all of a sudden you're like, I don't like that about you. And that is not okay.
How many married couples though that have newly married, like on their honeymoon, I can never imagine fighting with you about anything.
Oh, please. I do premarital counseling. If you're listening to me and I've had you for premarital, I love you, but also it's my least favorite counseling to do. Why? Because everyone's in denial. Yep. And if you know me, you know I got to boot your butt out of denial if we're going to do any work together here whatsoever. And I mean that in the gentlest way. So you have two people who the ego boundaries come back, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, that's not okay anymore. Before I was so in love with every thought you had, and I thought you were fascinating. So when you interrupted me, I let you because I was gaining something. I was learning about you. But now I'm like, I kind of know you. I've heard this story before, and you just interrupted me. Right? So it changes. Now, this is a natural course of relationship. So what do? If we have a feisty personality, we up the ante. If you don't, and a lot of us withdraw. Right. We shut down. We stop fighting for it. We don't say, hey, you're not
Yes.
listening to me. We just go, oh, okay, right. That's just a personality style. Both are problematic in relationship. So when I work with couples and that dynamic is present, I might look at you in a session. Again, I might say, stop trying.
My therapist has told me that before.
Yeah, just stop trying. and the consequence in the relationship is his to bear.
Yeah. He said, surrender. You've done everything else.
100%. Like, and I might say in front, and couples come in and they bring all their stuff into the room, and it's wonderful to work with. I love working with couples. Premarital's harder, but
Yeah.
couples like that are really digging in, great work. And so I might say, stop trying. What are you hearing her say? Just shh. You talk. What are you hearing her say? Well, she's saying that, I never do anything right. Actually, I didn't hear that. Let's try again. And so the tool, and this is chapter 2 in the toolbox, the tool is listening. Mm-hmm. And if you can't listen, you cannot have a relationship. I mean, it sounds really obvious. Thank you, Captain Obvious. But think about it. You can't resolve conflict because you can't identify what it is.
I don't think that's obvious to people. Now that you say it,
it's like listening.
Yeah, duh.
Right.
But
so what the tool that would need to be in place here is, okay, when I say blank, I need you to reflect it back to me.
Right, mirroring.
And it sounds so hokey at first. When I'm coaching couples in the room, they're always kind of rolling their eyes at me. I'm like, I know. I don't like it either.
Works.
But you have to learn.
Works.
You have to learn the tool. You have to learn the skill. And so what winds up becoming a habit, and imagine in your relationship, if this was a habit, is if one or the other of you says something difficult, the other one says, all right, so what I'm hearing you say is blah, 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 blah. Did I get it?
Did I get it?
Now we're connected.
Yeah, and then you can say, not exactly. Like,
Yes.
yeah, and then they can go,
okay,
they can try
me.
again. Or you could say, you could help, but it is a deep listening exercise.
100%.
And then you realize, because we did do it with our therapist, you realize in that moment, have we ever listened to each other? Like really listened to each other?
100%.
So that's why I don't think it's obvious. I think that like you just said it and we think, well, yeah, of course, right? Like, I mean, we're so good at listening to our girlfriends.
Kind of.
I mean, like at least my girlfriends are. But but with the husband and the wife or the relationship situation that you might be in, in that moment I thought, have you ever actually really listened to me?
Yeah, and we have to ask ourselves this too. This is equally important. Am I really listening to you?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because the first chapter of my book, and really I'm not pointing to this book all the time for any other reason other than I think it's useful. The first chapter of the book.
But you should read it. You should stop what you're doing. Get it and read it. The toolbox.
Finish this podcast, then get the toolbox.
Yeah,
it's on
thank
Amazon. It's under my maiden name, Vanessa Londino. But the first chapter is called The Right Mindset. Because before you can dive into, chapter 2, listening, chapter 3, emotional expression, chapter 4, validation, chapter 5, compassion, chapter 6, gratitude. I mean, it goes much deeper than these titles, but the first chapter, I'm like, wait a second, before we get into any of that, you need to understand that the only person you can control in a relationship is yourself.
Yeah, that's
bingo.
And so circling back, when you grow up in a dysfunctional family, especially where there's narcissism, then there's codependency, like there's all of these legs of dysfunction are tangled in together, right? You don't have a strong sense of what is yours and what is not yours.
Yes.
Right? What is my responsibility and what is not. And so if we're over functioners, and a lot of us are, really, I think a lot of people are, we're taking responsibility for other people's work in relationship, right? So we don't have to overfunction, right? If my husband is not listening to me, I'm not talking. And the reason why I'm not talking is because, and this is my worldview, I am created in the image of God. I was given a heart, a mind, and a voice. If that is not enough for you to pay attention, go do whatever it is you're doing, but it's your loss.
Yeah.
Right? Now, not every word I say is like gospel truth. My husband needs to be hanging on it. Not at all. But we have had to work on that, right?
Yeah.
And there's other factors that come to mind when I'm talking. If he's listening, he gets defensive. Like there's so much, and then I can raise my voice, and then I get sharp, and I get harsh.
Totally.
And then when I do that, he shuts down. I'm like, okay, now we're in it.
Yeah.
Now we're in the dance, right? So somebody's got to hit reset. Someone's got to go, okay, hang on. Who wants to go first?
Mm-hmm.
You or me. And whoever's talking, the other person's listening. And then we turn it around. And I work on that with couples in session, and it sounds so rudimentary, but actually when you get the hang of it and it becomes a habit, the trust in the relationship grows so much, because you know when I speak, you're listening. What the Gottmans say, and this is really true, is there's 2 questions that have to be answered in the affirmative if you're going to have a successful relationship. When I call, do you answer me? When I need you, do you come? If the answer to those 2 questions is yes, it's home, right?
Oh boy. And they're cue tears.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now, can we demand it? No. And this gets into a deeper issue, so let's keep going down. Okay?
Yeah.
We're on layers and layers, right? We're on behavioral layers. Now let's go to process, because behavior is what most of what we do in therapy is we're talking about behavior, but actually the process is far more important. And we understand this as clinicians, because when you're in relationship with your client, you know, I am not a perfect therapist. I've had empathic failures, and I've had to go back and go, oh my gosh, I totally missed that cue. I'm so sorry, right? But the relationship is what comes first, not what you're learning, not what I don't care. Do you trust me? Do you feel safe with me? If you don't feel safe with me, all is lost, right? In a marriage, the same thing is true. In any relationship, the same thing is true, right? So then we talk about process. How do we create safety? Because, and I don't think he'll care if I share this. He's so open anyway. My own husband. He had a habit of being defensive, right? Now, I can look at his history. I can psychoanalyze it to death. I understand why. Part of it was ego. Okay, fine. He's a human being. He's got an ego. I can deal with that. The other part of it was, Jared, his role in the family system was the golden child. I mean, he was his parents' golden child. I was the scapegoat. So everything's my fault. Nothing was his fault. And I'm like, oh, we have a problem.
Yeah.
Because we just like set dynamite off in the room, you know? And so what we worked on was me sort of advocating for myself more. And then he would have to go ahead and admit, you know what, you're right. Or I can see that from your perspective. He'd have to really work on validation. And I will say at this time, he is a pro.
Nice.
The man is.
Go, Jared.
He has grown so much.
Hunter and I have had the exact same metamorphosis.
Yes.
It used to be, I don't care if it was I'm mad you didn't unload the dishwasher, or I'm mad you forgot, to pick up such and such at the store. It was a go to the mattresses situation every time, because he'd be so defensive.
Yes.
And it always took, 15 years of me being like, I just shouldn't have to fight like tooth and nail just to tell you that my feelings are hurt. It shouldn't be, well, I know, but.
Yes.
There's no but. No butting. That just upsets you more, or gaslights you, or makes you feel like you're small. But he has done the same thing. It's like a total turnaround.
Yeah.
And it's life-changing.
Yes. So what do we mean when we talk about process? And I'm a therapist, and Jared's married to a therapist, so pray for him. He's married to me, so pray for him. But I could look at the behavior, and I could say, you're getting defensive, and I don't like when you get defensive, so change that. And that's a legitimate request. And he could say, well, you're raising your voice, and you're yelling at me, so change that. And I might say, that's a very legitimate request. Fine, we can both work on that. But then when you get down to the process level, you go, okay, I don't feel safe right now, which is why I'm kicking into, I don't have a flee, and I don't have a freeze response. I only fight. That's like the flight. I only fight.
Yeah.
So
I'm taking my earring.
Fawning?
It's fawning. It's fight.
Fawning
fight.
is the fourth one.
Yeah, that's the fourth one.
What's that one?
That fawning is
People
like
pleasing.
People. Yeah, you're a people pleaser.
Yeah.
My
buckling.
writing partner, Bessie, she wouldn't mind me saying this. She fawns.
Yeah.
And I fight.
Yeah.
I mean, I take my earrings out, and I'm like, take my shoes off, and I
go to the mattresses.
Yeah.
Great expression.
We're about
I'm
to fight.
Italian, and I'm also from New Jersey.
Yeah.
My sister and I laugh about this. I'm like, the word gentle does not exist in the state of New Jersey. Like, it exists in Connecticut, New York, Pennsylvania, like all the bordering states. It does not exist in the state of New Jersey. It doesn't. So we had to learn, both of us, all of us, how to be gentle. And, it's still a work in progress. But if we go down to that process layer and we think about, okay, what does it take here to create safety? I had to look at myself and go, when I raise my voice, I'm activating his autonomic nervous system. His defensiveness is a response to that. So if I really want him to hear me,
Quiet.
soft. I've got to develop the self-control. And now this is where it
I
became
have an
a
alarm
cycle.
that goes off on my calendar every day that just says soften.
Just soften.
Every day it
Take
goes
a breath.
off.
Right. When my husband got me this ring, I didn't want a white diamond. I wanted a pink one. And he said, why? And I said, because every time I look at it, I want to remember that I can be soft with you. That's why we have pink. So that's the process on my side. The process on his side was, how do I help her feel safe to talk to me? And that was sort of, I said, Jared, do you really want to be in a relationship where I'm shutting down and not talking to you?
Mm-hmm.
Like, is that long-term how we think we're going to have like the greatest relationship, intimacy, great sex? Like, none of that is going to happen if I don't feel heard.
Why do men not get this? I swear my husband still doesn't get this. We've been together 25 years. And I'm like, because men, they don't need connection to want sex.
No.
No. It's like
They feel connection after sex.
exactly. So like he feels that's exactly right. What we realized is like the sex helps him to feel connected.
Yes.
For me, especially someone who was sexually abused, and I get it. I know that that's not what's happening. I'm not, but I'm like, oh, absolutely not. I need to feel connected to you first. And it's 25 years in, we've been having the same conversation. Yeah. How can I change, or what can I say, or how can I put it towards him to say, like, I've literally said, like, it's not that I love sex. Of course, I love sex. I want sex. But the way in which I want it to happen is through connection. Sure. You have to connect with me first.
Well, how do you feel most connected? Is it talking? Like if you have a good, deep conversation, does that?
We don't even have to do that.
Okay.
Hugs, hands on the shoulder, kiss on the cheek.
So non-sexual affection.
It can also be, how was your day? Talk to me about it.
Yep.
What I can connect in any of those ways. Like, and it doesn't have to be a big thing. It could just be like him saying, how was your day? Oh, well, tell me about that. How did the writing session go? That's awesome. I'm so glad to hear that. Then he moves on and going to think, or coming in and giving me a hug. And it's so little what has to happen. But to get him to that place where he's doing it so that where he understands the connection of me needing to connect. I just don't know how to get that across.
Man, it's a dance.
It is.
So a couple of thoughts. Ian, I think he's an Ian, but he pronounces it Ian Kerner.
Okay.
Kenner. Sorry, sir, if I totally butchered your name. Anyway, I remember the title of the book. The title of the book is She Comes First.
Oh, I've heard of this book. I haven't read it. I haven't read it yet, but I've heard of it.
This is a great book.
She Comes First. Okay.
And it is a tutorial on oral sex, like how to properly go down on a woman.
Okay.
It's wonderful, ladies. Like,
I will be purchasing it.
Purchase the book.
I'm going to give it as a Christmas gift.
Pass it on to your man.
Everyone I know. You've been saying that all week.
So you read the book. You read the book, and the first half of the book is not about anatomy, genitalia, rhythm, strength, none of it. The first half of the book is how to make a woman feel safe enough to be aroused.
Amen.
Wow.
Okay.
That's it.
The mechanism that allows women to become fully sexually aroused is when they feel safe. Now, if we look at this through an evolutionary psychological perspective, this is really fascinating because women still, just the way our bodies are built, we are not as strong as men. So we are in intimate relationships with someone who could snap our neck. Right? Now, I don't mean to say that if you're listening and you've been in any kind of domestic violence, please take care of yourself right now. I don't mean to be glib about that, but I am saying that as a evolutionary psychological reality, that men are stronger and can do us harm. So the more safe women feel, and it's deeply rooted in us, okay, the more safe we feel, the more our walls come down. Okay, so the first part of understanding arousal, and if you want to have good sex and you want to be aroused to have good sex, is that a woman has to feel safe. Now, what makes a woman feel safe? Not necessarily physically safe, but emotionally safe.
That's mine.
That is the issue that you're describing.
Yes.
Is you have to create emotional safety for me, and then my sexual arousal kind of takes care of itself.
It does.
Right? It just takes care of itself. Now, the Gottmans, again, I'll go back to them because they're good at this. John Gottman wrote this book, but he didn't write it with Julie. He wrote it with somebody else, and I don't remember the name. It's called A Man's Guide to Women. And it's really short and really funny because it's written for men. So it's short and funny. Okay? I mean it. What man is going to read a 600-page book on women? But this book is 120 pages, and I read it, and I laughed out loud. Well, there's a chapter on sex. And John Gottman talks about, I think when he first started, he did some of his training in zoology. So he was studying animals. And so he would watch animals procreate. And so he's watching, a male tiger and a female tiger, and the the horses and the dogs and blah, blah, blah. And then he says, and then I had to observe porcupines. And I thought, oh, wait, now how's this going to work?
Yeah.
Okay. Because there's quills. And if you get your bits and pieces out, and you could be poked with quills. So what does the male porcupine do? He walks around to the front of the female and he strokes her cheeks.
And she lets him down.
Not yet. He strokes her cheeks and then he walks around to the back and he takes a look. And he takes a look to see if the quills have gone down. And if they have not gone down, he walks around to the front and he strokes her cheeks as long as it takes until those quills go down. And then the quills go down and he walks around from the back and he mounts her. Okay, there's a reason.
This is mind-blowing.
Okay?
So good.
This is what men need to understand is we have
You and your
both.
analogies with these animals, like, it's amazing. Remember the tiger story you told me a few weeks ago? Like,
Yeah.
we can learn a lot from animals.
I know.
We learn so much from nature, right? It's the first word of God is nature. So yes, the porcupine sex is it's a great example of that type of thinking. But I think men need to understand that we want them to.
Yes.
Right? We want the more tender side of you to come out with us because women, especially women today, and I don't think this has ever been different. Women have always had the roles that they've had. We just do it now with like computers and cars, right? But women have always held up so much of the family and society and community and the way that the community communicates with each other and stays locked into each other, right? What does that need in a woman? It means the most masculine side of your personality is present a lot of the day.
Yeah.
Right? So you're making decisions. Think about what is classically masculine and feminine.
We talk about this a lot, and because I had to work on my femininity, being a person who, being a child who left home at a really young age, being a survivor, being a person who had to learn how to be an advocate really early on, like all of those things. I was exercising a lot of the masculine side of me.
We all
and
do.
I had to really get in touch with my feminine side, which I have learned, and by the way, I have to work on it every day.
Yeah.
Like that's how wired I was.
Yes.
And so the unwiring of that is like I have to be very conscious of it. What I realized is actually where my power lies is in my femininity.
Okay. Yes. And it can lie in both. But I think when women do that, like if we go on retreats with other women and we get in touch with, our breath, and it's a very safe environment, right? Because we're in
Maybe that's why I feel power.
Herd.
Yeah.
We're in the herd of women,
Yeah.
right? But coming back to your question, and I think everyone has this question, like, how do I solve X relationship in my marriage? This is a universal question. Men listening to this podcast, you have to engage her femininity and allow it. You have to create a space for that part of her to come out and be safe. Because otherwise, you're going to keep running up against the most masculine part of your partner or your wife. And that can be super sexy, right? That can be really, because we're boss ladies, I'm a business owner. We have to do so much in a day. You run a nonprofit. Like there's so many masculine elements to our personality that come out that for me actually is a great source of my own strength. I'll speak for myself. I like that part of me. But when I'm with my husband, when I'm driving home, that, 25-minute drive home, it's hard to get out of that mindset, because we got to go home and cook dinner and let the dog and the kids and like we're still in go mode.
Yep.
Right. So one question to ask ourselves as women is, what do we need our partner to do to help us soften?
Oh, I don't have the answer for that yet.
Right? Because we do that
That's a
work on
great
ourselves and we do
question.
it among women and it comes out pretty naturally. I think this is a very feminine, empowered space that we're in right now.
Yes.
I mean, we're very deep. We're very vulnerable with each other. We're feeding each other's spirits. We're all going to leave here feeling full. Like that's a female moment, right? And when we think about marriage and the bringing together, sort of the yin and the yang and the beautiful, the light and the dark, the polar opposites of the masculine and the feminine, we have to look at our partners and say, and our husbands, if you're a female, and say, if you're in a heterosexual relationship, and say, how do I need you to help me bring out the feminine side of me in a way that feels really safe? And this gets back to what I was saying before. Don't worry about sex, worry about process. When I feel safe in my femininity, the outcome of sex will happen.
Yeah.
It's natural.
Yeah.
most of the time,
That's
unless
why
there's other
so many-
issues going on.
That's why so many women, like, haven't you always found, like, if you go on vacation, you know, like after that second or third day is like always, right? Like
Yeah.
when the good sex comes,
Yeah.
or like you finally relax enough.
Yeah.
Not only yourself, but as a couple. And you
Yes.
can kind of go back to those like more natural roles of like the feminine and the masculine.
Yes.
When you're in your house, and I tell, Hunter this all the time, I'm like, sorry, but like having sex after I've just had a long day and I've unloaded the dishwasher 36 times and done 18 loads of laundry and I've made dinner and I've worried about XYZ person's problems that aren't my own. And then I lay down and all of a sudden my own start piling on my head. Sorry, like that is not what I'm thinking about. But yet the second you take off all those stressors and you come out of that is when it just naturally occurs. I think the real key, and this is where therapy I think helps so much, is figuring out how to find that without having to be on vacation, right? Because no one's on vacation 52 weeks out of the year, and yet every man wants to be having sex 52 weeks out of the year. So
Well, and
how do you find it?
maybe we do too, but I don't think we do when we're not in that space.
No.
Right?
Yep.
And that's sort of a stereotype. Oh, men have much stronger sex drives. Not necessarily.
I don't
No.
think that's true at
I don't
all.
either.
I think women live in a place of being guarded with our walls up much
Correct.
more than we talk about.
Yes.
We're in the more masculine side of our personality much more than we talk about. And when we can move into the feminine, right, which is to say the nurturing, the softer, the more vulnerable, the more trusting side, right? That sexuality sort of is part of us in both places. Now, you can also have mind-blowing sex in a masculine side of your personality. It just sort of depends on the mood and the energy that's in the room. But if I think we're talking about like cultivating the trust and the safety that it takes,
Yeah.
we have to be asking ourselves, what do I need to enter that place? How do I enter it myself through breath work, through, many, many things we could talk about. But how do I invite him to invite me into that? And this is also important, when I'm in that place with you, which is a place of stunning vulnerability, what comes up in you? You can't handle that. And if you can't handle that, you're going to keep me in my masculine all the time. And you might abandon me in the feminine if you can't handle the power of femininity. So this gets to some real issues.
I
down there.
think that was part of what we kept bumping up against. And by the way, I'm so willing to share because I feel like this is so many people's.
Absolutely.
And also my husband knows it. I talk to all my friends about this anyway. Like he's, there's no
And cruise ships full of fans.
there's no stopping me. But part of it is because I think that so many people are dealing with it. Anytime that I have been in my feminine, when I, for example, had suicidal postpartum anxiety, right? Yeah. And I was so deeply in my feminine and so vulnerable and so scared. And I was saying, what is going on with me? Something's wrong. I need help. And his response was, you just, are having a hard time becoming a mother because you're so used to just, doing whatever you want with your life. And now you have to like give that up to take care of this baby as he went to the office every day and took care of his life. Right. And nobody get mad at him because I'm going to say, because it's such a heartless, right? In that moment, you're like, God, that's such a heartless thing to say to somebody who's wanting to commit suicide every day and trying to take care of a baby. And also working. I had to go back to work 4 months in, full filming, and then working sometimes 18-hour days with a baby and pumping and all the things.
You were exhausted.
It was awful. And his way of dealing with it was going in the backyard and having a beer and escaping and just not dealing with my femininity. And what we learned in therapy, and not till much later, that was a resentment that we're still working through.
For sure. That's a wound.
Huge wound. But part of that you're touching upon is I allowed my femininity to be very present, and it was rejected. And for him, what it was for him was pure panic.
He was terrified.
He was terrified. Here was a problem being presented to him that he had no idea what to do, how to fix it. Not that it was his job, but I think men think like, well, my job is to come in and give you the solutions and fix it, even though you're terribly unqualified most of the time. But that once we got to like that place where he could say like, I didn't know how, it was so scary. I didn't know how to fix that for you. Right? And I think that's so often when we feel abandoned in our vulnerability or in our femininity, often it's not because they're bad people or horrible people. If my husband was a bad person, I would have divorced him a long time ago. He was so scared. So can we speak to that a little bit? And how do you kind of bridge that gap when the other person is just as terrified as you are?
Yeah. So part of what you're talking about, and this is a beautiful example of this dynamic, is we inflict sometimes traumatic wounds on one another when we oversimplify complexity. You were in an extremely complex physiological, spiritual, psychological moment.
Right.
Okay. Now, I've worked with and through clients who've had severe postpartum depression. It's a lot of things at once.
It is not just chemical.
No.
The thing, and I can't, I'm not a person who can take medication. I tried, believe me, my doctor tried everything, and I can't take birth control, can't take medication, pain meds don't work on me. I'm just so sensitive to it all. So I really had to do the work. And what I learned was, yes, there was a chemical aspect to that.
Sure.
Also, I was breaking some deep trauma patterns that occurred with my mother,
100%.
that occurred with my grandmother. And when I went back and reviewed how they got pregnant, what was their first experience becoming a mother? My mother at 21 years old who got pregnant on her honeymoon the first time she had sex. My grandmother who got married at 19, 18 years old and got pregnant, you know what I mean? And not ready for babies, terrified, all that went into it. It was so multi-layered, the act of postpartum. We think it's just the chemical, and it's so much more than that.
Right. And I think do a solo podcast on just that journey if you haven't yet, because so many women need to hear it. So when you're listening to this podcast and you hear her talk about the layers and the layers and the layers of what was going on inside of her, and then the response is, oh, you're just overwhelmed, you're fine. Like that's the wound, is I have brought you the beauty and the brokenness of my human complexity, and you have simplified it down to nothing.
Yeah.
And that is one of the most invalidating things we can do to one another, and it really inflicts a wound. But I want to say this as well. We do this to ourselves.
We do.
We do this to ourselves. We are beautifully layered, textured, complicated. And the difference between complexity and complication is predictability. Some systems can say that one more time.
Look at us both. I swear we have the same brain.
Okay, so there are complex systems and there are complicated systems, okay? Complex systems just mean there's a lot going on at the same time, okay? The human body is highly complex. Complication means there's a lot going on at the same time and it's unpredictable. Okay? We are both, as human beings, especially women, let's be honest, and we can talk about the masculine and the feminine deeply into that. But I think we're coming close on time. So you tell me.
No, we're okay.
Okay. No, we're okay.
Okay. So when you bring that complexity, and in this case, you didn't have a choice. You weren't sitting in your room pontificating on the profundity of the human experience, and then you wanted to have a glass of wine and talk to your husband about it. No. You were thrust into the most complex moment of breaking through a wall that you probably had been through yet in your life.
Absolutely.
Okay. And so you bring that and he meets you with oversimplification. When we do that to ourselves, we think, what's wrong with me? Why am I crying?
Yeah.
We invalidate ourselves. And this is a wound. It is as wounding when you do it to yourself as when someone does it to you. And so we get so uppity and we get so angry when we're not being heard. I've told you the depth of my heart, my soul, and you're just not even listening. You've oversimplified it. You've tried to fix it. Folks, we do this to ourselves. We don't listen to our own complexity with curiosity, patience, humility.
I just said to Liz yesterday, of all the three, and I don't know if it's just my place and time or if this will always be true, top three things that I'm trying to be in any moment, authenticity and honesty are those. But right there next to it is humility.
Humble. Right?
Humility. I don't know.
Right? If your husband had just said, sweetie, I don't know what's happening, but I'm with you in it.
Yeah, that's it. And sometimes for myself, I'll say
Yes.
now,
Yes.
you know, after obviously we're doing so much work,
Yeah.
I'll say, God, I don't know.
Yes.
I don't know. But let me get curious about it.
Yes. Yes. You know, as a therapist, we're under pressure every day, every session, every hour to know.
Oh my God.
What's going on inside of me?
Yes.
What are the answers? Why do I feel this way? What's the way out? My least favorite question that I get a lot, and it's normal, people ask, how do I fix it? You know, and my response to that very often is,
what do you say?
well, I'm like, you're not a clock. You don't need to be fixed. You need to be heard. And you need to grow into whatever is happening inside of you with some semblance of self-acceptance, understanding that this is part of your journey. But I can't fix you because you're not broken.
Hang on. I think I'm just going to pivot and ask this side question. And I don't know how we're going to get there, but I feel like you need to get there because we've talked a lot about relationships.
Yeah.
And we've talked a lot about what can go wrong in them and potentially like small ways to fix them in terms of interpersonal skills and the way we relate to one another.
Yeah.
But how about fixing yourself?
Yeah.
Let's talk about that process a little bit.
Yeah.
Because you have a very distinct and
Oh, I love
very honestly simplistic way of looking at it. And I have tried for years to fix myself and have been to lots of therapy that turned out to be great talk therapy. They were great therapists who told me a lot about certain things and who helped me get through hard times. But it wasn't necessarily until I started seeing you
Lots of CBT.
that I started fixing who I was. And I am not nearly done yet and not even close.
You won't be for the rest of your life. We'll
But
be doing
I-
this forever.
But I at least am being starting. I've cracked the door. I've
Yes,
turned
you
the key
have.
and I've cracked the door to being honest.
Yes.
And if anyone is listening to this and you want to heal, the very beginning of that is starting to unlock some very ugly truths that you may not have wanted to see about other people in your life
Yeah.
and particularly about yourself.
Yeah.
And I just wanted you to share
Share the steps that you go through.
what you go through.
Yeah. So the structure of the therapy that I do, otherwise known as the Bentley method, it's been named the Bentley method by myself and others at this point, is there's three points, three modules, but really three passages that we have to get through on our way to being mentally healthy. And what do we mean by mentally healthy? Mental health is not having a diagnosis. That's nonsense. You know what I think about diagnoses. Mental health is being able to be in reality without deception or denial. That is mental health.
Say it
Your
one more time.
ability to be yourself in reality without deception or denial, and in that place, learn how to thrive. Okay? That's what we mean when we say someone who is mentally healthy. Now,
She's good.
thank you. Think the same thing about you.
Oof.
How do we get there? Well, we have to start with self-discovery. And so the three passages that I work with my clients through is self-discovery. This is going to sound very familiar. Self-compassion and self-love. Okay. Now, do I outline that with my clients? No, I do not. But that's what's going on in the background. Okay. We're in self-discovery. What is self-discovery? It is coming out of denial. It's owning your story. It's telling your story. It's not leaving any part out. We own not only what has happened to us, but what we have done.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. We own our family history. We start to become very honest about transgenerational trauma, which sits in us like it's our own. Okay. That is a fact. It's also, that is neurologically proven. So we start with self-discovery. Self-discovery is you have to learn a couple of things. The first thing you have to learn is you have to learn what the original wound was. What is the original wound? The original wound was the moment you lost your innocence. And I do not mean the first time you had sex, although that is a different sort of loss of innocence, sometimes a beautiful one, sometimes not at all. The loss of innocence is the moment you learned when the world was not safe. Now that can happen when you're 3, and it can happen when you're 13, 3 for you. Okay, that's very young. Okay, so what happens in the moment when we learn that the world is not safe? The word innocence comes from the Latin innocentum. That word means unwounded. Okay? That's what it means to be innocent. It means you are without wound. The moment you learn that the world is not safe, now what could that mean? It could be abuse. It could be a parent dying. It could be a natural disaster. It could be being lied to by a parent, by a mother. Like, it could be anything. It's the moment you learn, I can't trust. Now, what happens when a child, and usually we lose our innocence in childhood, what happens at this site of that original wound? You immediately develop coping mechanisms.
Yes.
They come so fast. It's human adaptation. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to try. A 4-year-old does not have to try to develop coping mechanisms. What is a coping mechanism? It is a way that you deal with the pain of the wound. Now, coping mechanisms can be healthy and unhealthy. Okay, a healthy coping mechanism is like reading, exercising. That can go to unhealthy, okay?
Right.
We can escape into books. We can escape into exercise. A healthy coping mechanism could be prayer. We can also escape and do a spiritual bypass. So coping mechanisms are healthy and unhealthy. Some are very unhealthy, like shooting up heroin. A coping mechanism could be having a good talk, journaling, very healthy. All of those are coping mechanisms. Then at the site of the wound, when we develop the coping mechanism, we also develop something very, very important, and this is where mental health fails. We develop defense mechanisms.
Yes.
And your defense mechanisms are all of the behaviors you've developed to protect yourself from further harm. Coping mechanisms can be healthy or unhealthy. Defense mechanisms are always unrelational. They have to be. They're not relational. The point, you can't protect yourself and connect at the same time. You can't, it's like trying to sneeze with your eyes open. You can't do that at the same time. You cannot connect and protect at the same time.
Vicky's going to have an aneurysm over here. If you
No,
say
because-
anything else like smart or brilliant or whatever, that's going to be it.
That's so good. You cannot protect and connect
No.
at the same time.
Nope.
No. So, and that's why I wrote the toolbox, because you're going to be connecting, not protecting. So you develop your coping mechanisms and your defense mechanisms. Again, you don't have to try. If you're listening to this podcast, you didn't have to try. You did it naturally. Your defense mechanisms are non-relational, but they're very self-relational in that they keep you safe. Okay, so you've got the original wound when you lost your innocence. That's the scene of the crime. Now, there could be many wounds, but the original one is the scene of the crime, right? You've got coping mechanisms. You've got defense mechanisms. I don't want to overwhelm you, but you've got coping mechanisms and defense mechanisms for every time you've been wounded.
Yes.
Okay, that's why the work keeps going, but stay tuned. So then we move, that's your story. Once you understand that, you've done more work than 99% of the people on planet Earth. Once you know that about yourself, just those facts, okay? Then you start to identify the emotions that you experienced at the time. They're usually so. I was ashamed, I was afraid, I was confused. You know, there's only so many emotions we feel in these moments. All of that can be true. And there's even more. And then we move into self-compassion. Now, why is self-compassion important? Well, self-compassion is important because self-compassion is what allows you to be honest with yourself. If there is not a soft place to fall, you will lie. It's human nature. Again, we have to come at this from compassion. People who lie are terrified. They're afraid of the truth. They're afraid of their own reaction. They're afraid of yours. And there are other reasons for lying. But I think relationally, the reason people lie is because they're afraid. The more compassion you have for yourself, the more the truth of who you are can come out. That is creating safety within.
It's so true.
Yep.
The second I became my safest space,
Yes.
I was able to tell the truth about everything.
Yes. And that's what allows us to sit here and be this sort of emotionally naked with each other. Because we know when we leave, I can look in the mirror and go, I love you, girl.
That's right.
You
I
had to
got
clear
you.
your throat a couple times. I hope that wasn't terrible on the mic, but I still love you, girl.
You are so right. Yes.
Right?
It's even different filming this podcast 3 years later
Oh, I bet.
than when I started it. I used to be so in my head.
Yes.
When it first started, I was like, oh my gosh, did I say like too many times?
Well, I did
ask
hear
the right
today. I mean,
question?
it was like 2 minutes in where I looked right in your beautiful green eyes and I thought, Vanessa, breathe. Just breathe, connect to your breath. You're good. And as soon as I did, I got into my flow. Right? But like I don't know you. I know you. But like, I don't know Zach. You know, it's nice to meet you. But Zach's our wonderful
Zach,
AV
by
guy
the
back
way,
here.
No. I just have to tell you, this character over here has had earpods in, probably watching like Seinfeld. Well, no, you're way too young for Seinfeld, but like watching all kinds of things on other episodes. dialed in over here. I know you
on
love
this
her
interview.
too.
I mean, because we've been talking about periods and all sorts of stuff. And then
Perimenopause.
this is the first time I've seen him without those AirPods, and he is.
Well, he came in when we started talking about sex and how to get a woman fully aroused. But I know you. But it's, you know, as
We
soon as-
see you, Zach.
That's okay. But now that we're talking about like the deep stuff of how to heal, Zach's
He
actually
is
still with us.
listening.
He's still with us. So we move into self-compassion. Self-compassion answers the why. Why did I become who I became? And I will tell you, self-compassion is what allowed me to fall in love with the bitch I was when I was 22 years old.
Yeah.
Because I started looking at, I had this dialogue. I'll tell you this story. I was sitting in remember the Barnes and Noble? It used to be where West End is.
Yeah.
Okay, it used to be a Barnes and Noble. Anyway, it was this coffee shop, and I'm sitting there with my journal, and I had just left therapy, and I'm dealing with self-loathing, and there's this part of me that I hate, and it's that part of me, the part of me that's aggressive and can be arrogant. You know, again, the apples don't fall that far from the tree. And I'm looking at this part of myself, and I started journaling, and I used a journaling exercise where I was writing to her and then letting her respond. Mm-hmm. And so this goes on for about 30 minutes. And then finally, that part of me, I was like, but why did you have to be so difficult all the time? And that part of me responded, and I will never forget it. That part of me said to me, who do you think protects the child? And I was like,
Mic drop.
thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I went from I hate you to thank you.
Thank you so
That's
much.
right. I had the same experience, and that's
Yes.
and only then was I able to become safe in my body when I was able
Yes.
to go back and look at the parts about myself that I
Yes.
hated the most
Yes.
and figure out that there was a part of my brain,
Yeah.
a part of who I am,
Yeah.
that is that little girl
Yes.
that was like,
She's still in
who
us.
do you think has protected you for all of these
Yes.
years? It has been me.
Yes.
And then
the
have
strongest part of us, the shadow.
Yes. And by the way, and sometimes that hypervigilant little girl
Yeah.
also saved my kid's life.
Yeah.
That hypervigilant little girl helped my dad, saved my grandmother's life when she had stroke. She came up, she came at it, she took charge, she did her thing. But now it's saying to her, I love you so much, but I'm going to drive the car.
Yes.
You got to sit in the back seat for a little bit.
Yeah.
I don't want to make you go away.
Yeah. I just don't need you every day now.
I just don't need you every day. But I think we spend so much time trying to get rid of those parts of ourselves that we hate.
Yes.
And that's the problem. It's like
Yes.
you're self-loathing parts of who you are by saying, God, I hate this part of myself, instead of getting to know that person
Yes.
and their why.
And seeing the function.
And seeing that actually I don't want her to go away. I need her. There is a moment in time where my child will have to have another heart surgery, and I will say, girl, let's go.
100%.
LFG.
100%. So that's the self-compassion piece, is we have to get to a place where we can look at ourselves, the story of our life, our coping mechanisms, our defense mechanisms, which are hugely problematic, and go, I get it. I get you. Then and only then can we move into self-love. And when we move into self-love, we have to confront the shadow, which is what I just talked about. You have to confront the parts of you that are not so pretty, not so likable, not so strong. Some parts of the shadow are really weak and deceptive and squirrely and shady, and, you know, the times we've lied. I mean, there's so much about us. Again, we're complicated and complex. We have to be able to look at ourselves, and the self-love is sort of the end of the therapy, but by that time, they don't need me anymore. Because, and I will say this, and it's true of you, and it's true of all of my clients, I love them. And I really mean that.
Don't start on me. Well, you know I can't
really
cry.
do. Well, I shall remain silent. I love them as much as I can in the room for what they show me. But the goal there is I'm going to model what this looks like. And I am a therapist who will say to my clients, I love you. Some of my clients leave session like, I love you. I'm like, I love you too. I'll see you in 2 weeks. Like, why? Because we're humans and we need it. I'm so tired of the field of mental health being behind a white little lab coat. We're not scientists. We're not looking into petri dishes. We're looking into the human heart, the human soul. Yes, I love you. Of course I love you. How could I not? Every week you come in here and you show me the most beautiful, precious, broken parts of your humanity. How could I not fall in love with you?
Right.
Right? Of course I love you. My goal is for you to love yourself the way God loves you.
Yeah.
So if I can be some sort of mirror reflection of that, I will do it in whatever fallible, broken way I can. But that's the goal, is when you know yourself, self-discovery, and you've got compassion for yourself, self-compassion, you can develop self-love. That inner cycle of learning the self, having compassion, and developing love can be done on repeat for the rest of your life. It's a set of tools you have. That's what therapy should give people. It should give you an inner process of self-love you can hold and use forever with yourself. When you love yourself with that kind of compassion, how do you think you love other people?
Way better.
Compassion.
Yeah.
And I don't know you as well as I know myself, but I know the system of me, and I know that all the places in me that weren't so likable came from wounds, so I know that's true for you too. Now, does that mean I have to interact with you and, be your best friend? No, it does not. We can have boundaries, but we can also have compassion with our boundaries.
But this is where you change lives. This is where fixing yourself fixes the world.
Healing, yeah.
It is the only way.
Healing your relationship with yourself. I move away from the language of fixing because you're not a clock. But
You're
I would
right.
say healing your relationship with yourself. That is, for me, okay, you could have 100 therapists on here, all brilliant, talented people worthy of being heard. For me, that is the goal of therapeutic work, is developing an irrevocable, meaning it cannot be taken back, and an unconditional self-love. Once you've done that, you're healed.
What
I
happened?
love you
I love you too.
so much. Thank you so much for the way that you approach all of it, the way you human, truly. Thank you for that. Thank you for the minutes and moments that you've given us. I want her back for all of it.
Sorry, you have to move here.
I want her back.
You have to move here, Callie.
I want every time I come, we have to have her back to talk about more things.
Yeah.
That's the thing, is there's so much to talk about in
so
this space.
much.
There's so much.
There's
You could
so
do,
much.
well, she does. Everyone, she has her own podcast. It's called Substance, not Psychobabble.
Oh,
and
it's
it
so
will
good.
change your
Yes.
freaking life. It's a matter of fact, I wouldn't let myself listen to it. So the way I met Vanessa was through a couple of my friends, actually, who are also clients, and raved about her. And I had good experience with therapy, not the best. And I was like, I think I'm good. I just don't need it anymore. I think I'm fine. I'm good. Decided to try it out, but I purposefully did not listen to your podcast because I was like,
Good.
I don't want to come in like with ideas already.
That's right. Good.
But now I am, and
Blake's
oh
like,
my God,
it's
it's
so good.
good. Y'all.
That's very sweet. And so I want to say a couple things about that. Number one, I don't follow my clients on social media for the same reason. I need you to come in with what you come in with. I need to know you as you are presenting yourself to me. I don't need to see
How you present yourself to the world.
or how people react to you. Like, because
Right.
that does shade us. We're humans. I'm
Yeah.
not God. I can't be perfectly objective all the time. Like, I have to protect my objectivity for my clients. So I don't follow my clients. But I will say, because this is important, Liz has outed herself as a client. But I did, for those of you listening and think, well, is that ethical? I did seek supervision about this. And when Liz asked me to be on the podcast, I said I have to seek supervision because I want to make sure we're not in a dual relationship. I want to protect the therapeutic relationship first. And if my supervisor and I talked about it and we decided it might muddy the water between me and Liz, my answer would have been no.
I would
Because-
have just fired you.
Well, this relationship comes first always. And so I want, if you're listening, you think, well, is that ethical? It is. And also, I received no money for this. So there's not a dual relationship here. And I really did dig into it. Why? Because the relationship comes first. The relationship matters. She's got to trust that she's my number one priority. And if this was going to muddy the water, I never would have done it. So we talked about it. I got supervision about it. And I felt at peace about it. And that's why I'm here. And that's an important thing to say, because when it comes down to a therapeutic relationship, I mean, we live in Nashville where everybody wants to be a star, including therapists. And I hear stories like, oh, you know, my therapist asked me if they would listen to a song that they wrote. I'm like, what? Okay, that relationship, again, if
It's sacred.
it's sacred. And again, we don't grow unless we are safe. Right? So that was really the consideration. And I wanted to throw that in because if you're listening and you're a therapist, you're like, wait, that's her client. She's on the podcast. Liz outed herself, right? I did not break confidentiality.
That is true.
Right. But also there was supervision sought, and there was a conversation here, and we made sure that it wouldn't muddy the water.
That's right.
Well,
Nikki's in shock. She's going to be okay.
You wrap this one up. I'm sitting.
Listen,
I feel like I got a
there
massage and acupuncture and like, I don't know what's happening.
I need to send you to like a spa day after this.
I feel like I need to take a nap. There's a lot of big feelings over here.
We could both stand to take a nap. That is for sure.
You're working hard. That's for
Here's
sure.
the thing. We could have talked to you for 17 and a half hours, and it probably wouldn't have been enough. I mean, the truth of the matter is the reason we started this podcast in the first place 4 years ago was to help people who are struggling in, well, it originally was Alzheimer's and dementia
care
by themselves and giving care, and we're alone. And specifically, we're in a younger demographic providing that care and feeling alone. But that has shifted. And in large part, it has shifted because I've shifted. I am no longer a caregiver. However, I feel, well, to children, yes, no longer to my parent. But what I have found is that the tools that I have been building up over the course of the last 4 years with this nonprofit, with the community it's built, with the humans that have been incredible enough to come into my life. I mean, y'all, I have made the strongest and wisest decision in my life, and that is bringing people that are smarter and better than me all around me.
Amen to that.
And I have learned so much from all of them. And now, with Nikki's help, we are trying to do the best that we can to impart that knowledge of self-awareness and of growth and of the things that it really takes to find not just healing, but strength and an ability to endure the very natural things that are going to come at you in this life, because all life is one series of events, one after the next, that are going to bring you to your knees. And we hope some of them don't take you there too long. Others can keep you there for quite some time. And we just really want you to have the best shot you've got at making it through and coming through the other side of hard things. As Gunnar said, you know, when we talked to Gunnar and Dr. G, there's hard in life and then there's really hard in life. And we want you to be prepared for both of those things. And I think if there's any takeaway from today with Vanessa, it's that therapy can be such an incredible tool. It's probably the most precious gift that you can give yourself.
It's the best gift I've ever given myself.
And if you're saying, oh, I can't afford it or I can't make the time, you make time to scroll Instagram. You make time to go, you know, see a movie with friends. You make time to go out drinks with people or go out to dinner. Give up something. I don't care what it is. If it's an outfit, if it's a trip to, you know, a long weekend away once a year, I guarantee 6 months in therapy is going to be a hell of a lot more restorative than 2 days at a beach.
In Mexico.
Bottom line. And we just thank you so much for your time and for the gift of you that you are in this world. You have been such a gift to me. I will stop there before I start crying. But you are not just a wealth of information, but the way that you deliver it and the way that you have an ability of seeing people. I mean, I feel like some days I can go into your office and not speak. And you're like, oh, got your number, have it written down, and it is like on my t-shirt. It's a truly amazing gift. You talked about the gift of tears. You have the gift of warmth and just invitingness. And so to hear you say, you know, your wound was that you thought you were anything other than just kind and inviting and warm is shocking. Number one, the Jersey side of it's not, but you are remarkable, and you have shared so much wisdom with our listeners today, and we're truly grateful. I hope you'll come back again and again.
I would be honored. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Vanessa.